Welcome, my friend, to another journey through the stars. If you find yourself drawn to the mysteries of the Force and the secrets of the Sith, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community of galactic dreamers. Tonight, we venture into the shadows where few have dared to tread. The tale I bring you is one whispered only in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Story of ambition and power that altered the very fabric of the Force itself. In the cold silence of a hidden laboratory deep beneath the gleaming towers of Munilinst, a tall, gaunt figure stands motionless. His elongated fingers hover over a shimmering containment field, where countless microscopic particles dance in perfect harmony. This is Darth Plagueis, the wise master of the dark side, and keeper of forbidden knowledge that even the ancient Sith Lords dared not pursue. The air crackles with energy as Plagueis closes his eyes in deep concentration. The midi-chlorians within the field begin to move with purpose, swirling faster, clustering together, working against their natural order. A smile creeps across his pale, mournful features as something impossible begins to take shape within. The chamber, a life created not from the union of beings, but from the Force itself. But in that moment of triumph, a shadow falls across the laboratory. A presence approaches one, filled with patience and cunning. One who has been watching, learning, waiting, for this precise moment, when the secret to immortality lies within reach. Can the power to create life truly belong to a single being? What terrible price must be paid for such mastery over death itself? And what of the rumors that Plagueis discovered the secret to eternal life, only to lose it at the moment of his greatest achievement? Throughout the vast expanse of time, the struggle between knowledge and wisdom has shaped the destinies of countless worlds. Tonight, we unravel the enigma of Darth Plagueis, whose obsession with conquering death set in motion events that would one day engulf the entire galaxy in darkness. The boundary between life and death is not meant to be crossed, yet one Sith Lord dared to breach it, forever altering the balance of the Force and sowing the seeds that would grow into an empire built upon the ashes of the Republic. This is his story. This is the legend of Darth Plagueis. The vast galaxy of our tale spins in the twilight of the Republic era, nearly 5 decades before the fires of the Clone Wars would engulf countless worlds. It was a time of opulent prosperity for some, and quiet desperation for many, when the Senate corridors echoed with debates that seemed important, but were merely shadows cast by greater powers moving unseen. I am Caladan Voss. Once, I was a promising scholar within the Jedi Temple archives. Now, I am an independent seeker of knowledge others would prefer remain buried. My journey to uncover the truth about Darth Plagueis began not with some grand ambition, but with a simple anomaly in the historical records I was tasked with preserving. The banking world of Munilinst rises before me as my small transport descends through layers of security. The planet gleams like a polished gemstone, its surface dominated by pristine white spires that house the intergalactic banking clan, but beneath the mathematical precision of its architecture lies a cold calculation that extends far beyond mere credits. For here, wealth is merely another form of power. The air on Munilinst carries a distinct metallic scent, mingling with the subtle fragrance of the narcoal blossoms that adorn the entryways of the grand financial houses. My footsteps echo against marble floors polished to mirror perfection as I enter the public archives of the banking clan. My official credentials granting me access to records few outsiders ever see. I must warn you, comes a whispered voice beside me. Some histories are best left undisturbed. The speaker is Jorik Asharin, elderly Jedi consular, whose knowledge of ancient texts once made him renowned throughout the Order. His presence here is not coincidental. I know that. It is the Council's way of monitoring my research without directly interfering. The disturbances in the Force that you seek to understand. Jorik continues, his weathered face solemn beneath his hood. They began long before the events you're investigating. The ripples of Plagueis' work continue to spread outward, through time itself. The banking clan archives rise around you, estering shelves of data crystals, each containing financial records spanning centuries. But I seek a particular set of transactions, ones that would reveal the movement of resources toward purposes no ledger would openly name. There was a moon, I say quietly, who served as chairman of the clan nearly 40 years ago. Higo Damask was his public name, but evidence suggests he led a double life, shrouded in Sith teachings. Jorik's eyes narrow slightly. The Sith were extinct for a millennium before Maul revealed himself on Naboo. The Council would have sensed such a presence, would they? I ask, retrieving a data crystal from my robes. Or was this Sith Lord skilled enough to hide in plain sight? His Force presence concealed, even as he moved among the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The crystal glows softly as I insert it into a reader projecting the image of a tall, austere moon in elegant robes. His face bears the characteristic, elongated features of his species, yet there is something in his eyes, a depth of calculation beyond mere financial acumen. Higo Damask too, I explain, head of Damask Holdings, which operated as a seemingly legitimate investment firm, but channeled vast resources toward secret installations across the Outer Rim facilities, where I believe experiments of a most forbidden nature were conducted. As we move deeper into the archives, the temperature seems to drop perceptibly. The pristine white walls of the banking clan repository give way to older sections, where ancient financial records are stored in climate-controlled vaults. Here, the mathematical precision of Munilinst's architecture takes on a more ominous quality filled with shadows that seem to linger, even under bright illumination. There are rumors, Jorik says carefully, of a private retreat on the moons of Sojourn, where Damask would host gatherings of political and financial elites, a place where the future of the Republic was quietly shaped by those with no official authority to do so. I nod slowly, and it was there, I believe, that he began to gather acolytes, not Sith apprentices in the traditional sense, but influential beings who would unwittingly serve his greater purpose. Our research extends through the day and into the night. The white spires of Munilinst now gleam under the light of 3 pale moons. The pieces of the puzzle begin to form a pattern, yet crucial. Elements remain elusive. There was someone else, I murmur, studying a financial report that shows an unusual pattern of investments in scientific research facilities. Someone who worked closely with Datwesk, perhaps initially as a protege, but who may have eventually become something more. Jorik's expression grows troubled. If what you suggest is true, if Plagueis did indeed take an apprentice, then the rule of 2 continues. The apprentice would have eventually confronted the master, and perhaps, he pauses, I add quietly, taken his place, as the Sith have done for generations. As we prepare to leave the archives, a shadow seems to pass over us, though no physical presence can be detected. For the briefest moment, I sense a cold attention focused upon our work, as if our investigation has disturbed something that prefers to remain hidden. We should proceed with extreme caution, Jorik warns, his voice barely audible. If Plagueis truly mastered the secrets you believe he sought, then we are dealing with knowledge that defies the natural order of the Force itself. The night of Munilinst carries a chill that seems to penetrate to the bone as we depart. The banking clan complex. Above us, the stars shine with cold indifference. Countless worlds unaware that their fates may have been altered by the ambitions of a single Sith Lord, whose greatest works were performed in absolute secrecy. The native K avoided this area entirely. I noted, as we disembarked, local legends spoke of voices in the wind, sounds that drove listeners to madness. Jorik nodded grimly. Such tales often surround places strong with the dark side of the Force. The abandoned mining facility stood partially reclaimed by the elements, its durasteel structures corroded by the salt-laden air. Official records indicated the site had been deemed unprofitable and shuttered decades ago. But as we cautiously stepped into the main complex, it became immediately evident. This place had never truly been a mining facility at all, beyond the perfunctory processing equipment. Near the entrance lay a laboratory far more advanced than anything needed for mineral extraction. Much of the technology had been stripped out, but the specialized containment systems embedded in the walls could not be so easily removed. "These are midi-isolation chambers," Jorik said quietly, running his hand along the distinctive circular housings. "I've seen similar designs in ancient Jedi texts." Discussing the nature of the living Force, I added, taking in the vast array that filled the chamber, but never at this scale. This facility could process thousands of samples at once in what appeared to be the central research area. We found a damaged data terminal. Most of its contents had been wiped, but its backup systems retained fragmentary logs that painted a disturbing picture of the work that had been conducted here. The records spoke of Subject Zeroer being with an unusually high midi-chlorian count, whose samples were used as a baseline for comparative analysis. Following that were references to attempted midi-chlorian augmentation across various species, clinical descriptions of failures that turned my stomach. Beings whose cells had ruptured as their midi-chlorians multiplied uncontrollably, others whose connection to the Force had been severed entirely, leaving them as hollow shells. "These experiments," Jorik whispered, his voice strained, "they violate everything the Force represents. Life is not meant to be engineered in this manner." A separate section of the laboratory appeared to be medical in nature, facilities far beyond anything a mining operation would require. Surgical suites with highly specialized equipment designed for precision work at the cellular level stood in pristine condition. Despite the years of abandonment, he wasn't just studying midi-chlorians. I realized with a growing sense of horror, Plagueis. He was attempting to create them, to artificially induce Force sensitivity, where none existed naturally. As we explored deeper into the facility, we discovered a heavily secured chamber, sealed by both mechanical locks and what appeared to be Sith alchemical wards. It took our combined skills several hours to bypass the protections, but what we found inside justified such extraordinary measures. The chamber was small, containing only a single stasis pod connected to monitoring equipment that was still functioning on emergency power. Within the pod floated what appeared to be a human embryo, suspended in development for what the logs suggested had been nearly 50 years. "This is impossible," Jorik breathed, studying the readouts. "The midi-chlorian count in this embryo exceeds anything recorded in the archives, save perhaps for a handful of legendary Jedi. More disturbing still were the notes written in Plagueis' own precise handwriting, describing how this embryo had not been conceived naturally, but through direct manipulation of midichlorians, compelled to coalesce into a living form. Through the power of the dark side, he was attempting to create life. Directly from the Force itself, I said, the implication sending a chill through me, despite the humid air in the laboratory, to become, in essence, a god. The logs indicated that this experiment had been deemed partially successful but ultimately abandoned when the embryo proved unstable, yet references to a more promising approach suggested that Plagueis had not given up his goal. He had merely changed his methodology as we prepared to leave with the data we'd recovered. A subtle shift in the atmosphere made both of us freeze. Nothing visible appeared, but both Jorik and I felt it. A cold attention focused directly upon our actions. We're being watched, Jorik said softly, his hand moving instinctively to his lightsaber. The feeling passed as suddenly as it had come, but it left behind a lingering unease. Someone or something was monitoring our investigation. Whether it was a security system left by Plagueis or something far more sinister, we couldn't be sure. Our departure from Boldemnik was hastened by the approach of a banking clan security vessel, responding, perhaps, to a silent alarm we had unknowingly triggered. As our ship broke atmosphere, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of Plagueis' work. The data we recovered from the facility presented a troubling puzzle. The timestamps suggested that Plagueis had abandoned these particular experiments decades ago, implying that what we saw represented only the early stages of his research. What heights of terrible knowledge had he reached in the years since? More pressing still was the question of what had become of the fruits of that research. If Plagueis had truly discovered how to create life through the Force, such knowledge represented power beyond measure, and in the wrong hands it could upset the very balance of the galaxy. As our ship entered hyperspace, the stars stretching into blue lines around us, I pondered the growing evidence that Plagueis' true goal had been the secret of immortality itself, not merely the extension of life, but true mastery over death, the final limitation that even the most powerful Force users could never overcome. What terrible price had the galaxy already paid for his ambition, and what greater cost might still be exacted? Our findings from Boldemnik sparked deep concern when shared carefully with select members of the Jedi Council. Master Yoda's ears drooped visibly as he absorbed the implications of Plagueis' experiments. Mace Windu's expression hardened into stone, disturbing. "This information is," Yoda said finally, "but incomplete. Your picture remains." "With respect, Masters," I ventured, "the evidence clearly points to Sith activity of the most dangerous kind. If Plagueis was manipulating midichlorians to create life artificially, the implications extend to the very foundation of the Force itself." Windu exchanged a glance with Yoda before responding. "The banking clan's involvement suggests a more mundane explanation. Damask Holdings has always sought technological advantages to maintain their financial dominance. These experiments, while ethically reprehensible, may have been simply an attempt to develop medical technologies with commercial applications." This interpretation struck me as deliberately obtuse, but it reflected the Council's long-standing reluctance to acknowledge the continuing Sith threat. After centuries without confirmed Sith activity, many Jedi found it easier to attribute darkness to more familiar evils like greed and ambition. The facility was abandoned decades ago. Ki-Adi-Mundi added, "Whatever research Damask pursued. There clearly failed to yield the results he sought. The matter appears to be of historical interest only. I left the council chamber with a sense of profound unease. Their dismissal of the threat felt not just complacent, but willfully blind. Joe Rick, who had remained silent during the meeting, shared my concern. "They see what they wish to see," he said as we walked the temple corridors. "It's easier to believe that Plagueis was merely a wealthy moon with unethical research practices than to accept that the Sith have operated undetected for generations." The council did, however, grant us permission to continue our historical research, viewing it as harmless academic work that might yield insights into ancient Force techniques that limited authorization would prove invaluable in the days ahead. Our investigation shifted to the financial aspects of Damask Holdings. If Plagueis had abandoned his work on Baldemnik, it wasn't because he'd given up his goals. It was because he had found more promising avenues. By tracing the flow of credits, we hoped to discover where those new experiments had taken place. The banking clan's records were meticulously maintained, but deliberately obscured, hidden behind a labyrinth of shell companies and proxy investments. What emerged after weeks of careful analysis was a picture that oddly seemed to support the council's more mundane interpretation. Higo Damask had indeed invested heavily in medical research, particularly in technologies related to life extension and cellular regeneration. The profits from these investments had been substantial, fueling the continued expansion of Damask Holdings until it controlled significant portions of the galaxy's financial infrastructure. "Perhaps we've been overthinking this," suggested, as we reviewed our findings in my modest temple quarters. Moon are known for their longevity, often living well beyond 200 standard years. It would be natural for Damask to have a personal interest in technologies that might extend his life even further. The pattern of investments showed a businessman obsessed with control and personal gain, using his wealth to accumulate even more wealth and influence. Nothing in the financial records directly contradicted the image of Damask as simply an ambitious, if ruthless, financier. It would be a perfect cover, I countered. What better way for a Sith Lord to hide his true nature than behind the facade of predictable greed? The dark side has always fed on ambition and the desire for power, but even I had to admit the evidence of Sith's involvement remained circumstantial. The connection between Higo Damask and Darth Plagueis rested primarily on the holocron vision and the nature of the experiments on Baldemnik, of which would convince skeptical minds on the council. The clinical language couldn't hide the extraordinary implication. Plagueis had discovered methods to heal injuries and, perhaps, even prevent death through direct midichlorian manipulation. In a secondary chamber, we discovered what looked like a meditation space, unlike anything I had ever seen in Jedi teachings. The walls were inscribed with ancient Sith glyphs, and the floor featured a complex pattern that appeared deliberately designed to focus and amplify dark side energies. "This is where he would commune with the dark side," Jorik said softly, hesitant to step fully into the room, seeking wisdom from the accumulated knowledge of the Sith who came before him. As I cautiously stepped into the meditation chamber, the air seemed to grow thick around me. The Force felt strange, here neither purely light nor fully dark, but distorted, as if the fundamental laws of nature had been bent too many times and never quite returned to their original state. I settled into a meditative posture at the center of the room and opened myself to the Force, not seeking power, but understanding. The sensation that followed defied explanation. Images rushed through my mind, stars being born and dying, cells dividing and mutating, the endless cycle of life and death playing out across microscopic and cosmic scales. And through it all ran a current of fierce determination, a refusal to accept the natural order. I felt Plagueis' presence not as a ghost, but as an imprint embedded in the Force itself. His obsession with transcending mortality had left a scar in this place, his will lingering in the very walls around me. When I emerged from the trance, Jorik was watching me with visible concern. "You were in that state for nearly 2 hours," he said. "Your life signs fluctuated in ways I've never witnessed before." The experience had left me with a profound realization. Plagueis had not merely tried to extend his life through conventional means, or even traditional Sith techniques, had pursued something far deeper, the ability to directly control midi-chlorians, the very biological conduit that linked all living beings to the Force. Deeper within the facility, we uncovered one final chamber sealed even more securely than the rest. Inside wasn't more lab equipment, but a trove of ancient texts and artifacts. Some were recognizably Sith in origin, while others came from traditions so obscure that even Jorik, with all his knowledge, could not identify them. Among these was a partial manuscript written in Plagueis' own hand detailing his understanding of what he called the ultimate power. It didn't describe the creation of life, as we'd initially suspected, but something even more profound, the ability to prevent death itself. According to Plagueis' writings, he had gone beyond healing injuries. He claimed to have found a way to stop natural cell death entirely. In clinical trials, he said, he had kept specimens alive, indefinitely halting their aging processes through ongoing midi-chlorian manipulation. The final pages of the manuscript mentioned that Plagueis had begun training an apprentice in these techniques, though the individual was referred to only as the student, with no name or species ever identified. As we prepared to leave Sojourn with these findings, the peaceful beauty of the moon seemed to shift. The tranquil lake, once serene, now felt like it concealed unknowable depths. Much like the Sith Lord who had called this place home, the stars wheeled slowly overhead as our ship lifted from the surface, their eternal light in stark contrast to the unnatural immortality Plagueis had chased with such relentless focus. Our discoveries from Sojourn demanded careful review. Away from both the Jedi Council and the unseen force we suspected was tracking our progress, we withdrew to the ancient Jedi outpost on a saucer world whose legendary libraries had once housed the greatest collection of Force knowledge before their destruction. Millennia ago, the ruins offered both isolation and the advantage of a natural force, nexus perfect for examining what we had recovered from Plagueis' secret lab. For 3 days, we immersed ourselves in his writings, trying to piece together his philosophy on immortality. His understanding of the Force is unprecedented, Jorik admitted reluctantly, as we pored over the manuscripts by the light of a single lamp. Plagueis rejected the traditional Sith obsession with physical dominance in favor of something far more subtle. According to the texts, Plagueis believed that the Sith of old had fundamentally misunderstood the Force, where others tried to dominate it through passion and emotion. He believed mastery lay in understanding its most basic component, the mid that bound all life to the cosmic energy field. He didn't see the Force as something mystical to be commanded, I observed. He viewed it as a biological phenomenon, something that could be studied and ultimately manipulated at the cellular level. The most staggering revelation came on the morning of the 4th day. We finally decoded a passage written in An ancient Sith cipher section, Plagueis described as his greatest breakthrough, achieved after decades of research. I have succeeded where all others have failed. The translation read, not through ritual or alchemy, but through direct communion with the midichlorians themselves. They can be compelled not just to heal, but to create through proper application of the dark side. Life itself can be initiated within the Force, independent of natural reproduction. The implications left us speechless. Plagueis was claiming that he had discovered how to create life directly through the Force, bypassing all natural processes. If this is true, Jorik said finally, his voice unsteady, then Plagueis achieved what many would consider godlike power. The ability to create life is the ultimate mystery of existence. Even more disturbing were the notes that followed. Plagueis described an experiment conducted near the end of his known life. He claimed he had focused the full strength of his will upon the midichlorians, compelling them to coalesce into a new consciousness, born within the Force itself. The vergence takes form. One entry read, slowly, but with growing certainty, the midichlorians respond to my directive. Gathering to my purpose, a consciousness forms within the cosmic force, one that will eventually seek physical form. When it does, it shall be a being of unprecedented power, the living embodiment of the Force itself. Jorik turned pale. A vergence in the Force, he whispered, created artificially through Sith technique. Such a thing shouldn't be possible. But the clinical precision of Plagueis records left little room for speculation. Had documented every measurement midichlorian counts. Force resonance patterns all aligned with known phenomena. Either he had truly achieved what he claimed, or he had fully convinced himself that he had. As we dug deeper into the manuscripts, another pattern became clear. Plagueis' later writings revealed growing paranoia toward his apprentice, always referred to only as the student, or sometimes the shadow. He grows too quickly in knowledge, one entry noted. His questions probe the limits of what I have revealed, always seeking the final secrets I have withheld. His ambition is as vast as the dark between stars. His patience as deep as the ancient oceans of Manan. I have taught him much, perhaps too much, yet I sense he conceals his true progress from my awareness. These entries aligned chronologically with the period when Higo Damasked became more publicly active, particularly during negotiations between the Trade Federation and the outer systems that would later form the separatist movement. He was positioning himself, I realized, using financial influence to reshape galactic politics, while simultaneously pursuing immortality through the Force. The final entries in the manuscript were dated approximately 10 years before Higo Damask's reported death. They referenced a grand plan nearing fruition, and spoke of guiding key political developments on Naboo. The young queen proves malleable, one line read. Her senator more so. His ambition, a beacon in the Force. Through him, much can be accomplished with subtle guidance. The student sees only the political advantage. Blind to the greater purpose these manipulations serve in the cosmic design. As I read these lines aloud, Jorik's expression shifted from focused concentration to stunned realization. Naboo, he said. The senator from Naboo at that time was Palpatine, the same man who became Supreme Chancellor following the vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum. The connection hit like a thunderbolt. That vote, I said, was triggered by the Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo. The very crisis Plagueis appears to have orchestrated behind the scenes. We sat in silence as the implications settled over us like a heavy shroud. If Plagueis had been manipulating political events at that level, using the Naboo crisis as a keystone in a larger scheme. Then his reach extended far beyond what even we had suspected. And more terrifying still was the true identity of his apprentice, the Shadow, whose ambition even Plagueis had feared. The timeline, the political ties, the unfolding events, it pointed to a conclusion we dared not speak aloud, and as if in answer to our unspoken realization, the force around us shifted. The ruins of Ossus peaceful for thousands of years suddenly felt suffocating. Watchful, both Jorik and I sensed it at once. A cold attention, focusing directly on our work. The sensation was unnatural. "We need to leave," Jorik said quietly. Already gathering the manuscripts, we packed everything at once. As we prepared to depart, a sudden wind rushed through, the ruins whistling between the ancient stones like distant, mocking laughter. Our lamp flickered violently, nearly extinguished, plunging us into momentary darkness, before stabilizing again. The message was clear. We were no longer studying history. We had stumbled into a secret that was very much still alive, and something wanted it to stay buried. Our ship departed Ossus with urgency bordering on panic. We jumped to hyperspace with the gnawing sense that we were being watched, tracked, hunted. This facility wasn't for experimentation, it was for applying techniques Plagueis had already perfected. The computer systems were tightly secured, but Jorik's slicing skills eventually bypassed the encryption. What we found in the data stunned us. It documented hundreds of cases where Plagueis had used his mastery of midichlorian manipulation to alter living beings in ways that defied belief. Some of his subjects had been healed of conditions once thought incurable. Others had their natural lifespans extended dramatically. But the most disturbing entries were clinical records of individuals who had been dead some for minutes. Others, for hours, had been brought back to life through direct force intervention. He achieved it, I whispered, scrolling through the data, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. Plagueis truly found the power to prevent death, just like the Sith legend claimed, and yet the records also revealed the limits of that power. Reviving the dead demanded enormous concentration and energy. The process left Plagueis physically drained for days afterward. More importantly, it couldn't be performed on himself, at least, not during unconsciousness or after death. It created a paradox. He could save others, but would always need someone else to save him. This explains his obsession with creating a Force Virgins, Jorik murmured, a being powerful enough to restore him if his own abilities ever failed. The final system entry was dated on the same day Plagueis was officially reported dead. It wasn't typed, but dictated perhaps in his own voice. The apprentice suspects nothing. Tonight, as the Republic transitions to new leadership, so too shall the grand plan enter its final phase. Immortality awaits, not merely in continued existence, but in the eternal impact of work well conceived. As we absorbed the weight of that cryptic message, a secondary security system suddenly activated. Without warning, holographic projectors throughout the chamber blinked on. A tall, robed figure in formal banking clan attire appeared. Plagueis, or rather, his likeness. Unauthorized access detected. The hologram announced in a calm, cultured voice. Identity confirmation required. It was clearly just an automated program, not a true consciousness, but the image of Plagueis, projected so lifelike, still sent a chill through us. The hologram stood silently, waiting for credentials we didn't have. Its glassy eyes seemed to stare right through us. "We should leave," Jorek said quietly. This system might notify someone we can't afford to face. We turned to go, but the hologram spoke again. This time, the voice dropped to a lower register, no longer sounding like a security alert, but more like a personal reflection. Remember, the power over death is not found in desperate preservation of the self, but in the calculated preservation of one's work. True immortality lies in legacy, in the careful orchestration of events that continue to unfold long after the orchestrator has left the stage. The words echoed in my mind as we fled the estate. The automated defenses had fully activated behind us, even during our hyperspace jump back to Republic space. I couldn't stop thinking about that final message. Plagueis hadn't just sought physical immortality through the Force. He had prepared for failure. He had ensured that, no matter what happened to him personally, his work, his plan would survive him. The grand plan he spoke of would live on, likely carried out by the very apprentice who had troubled him in those final days. If that apprentice now held power at the highest levels of the Republic, then Plagueis had succeeded, not in living forever, but in creating a legacy that still lived. His vision hadn't ended. It was still unfolding decades later exactly, as designed, and the galaxy remained blind. The weight of what we'd discovered became heavier with each passing day. This wasn't just a historical curiosity anymore. If we were right, it was a present danger to the Republic and to the Jedi Order itself. We needed guidance, but we couldn't simply march into the Jedi Council chamber with this kind of information. Not when politics and pride might cloud judgment. Instead, we turned to those whose understanding of the Force reached beyond traditional Jedi orthodoxy. First, we visited Master Sinub. We met in the room of 1,000 fountains where the flowing water would help shield our words from curious ears. The elder Kossian master listened patiently as we explained everything, his long proboscis twitching in thought. Plagueis, he repeated, not found in the standard Sith genealogies, but there are whispers. Ancient texts speak of a hidden lineage, one that operated in total secrecy, always behind proxies, always in disguise. When we showed him the data on midichlorian manipulation, he didn't act surprised. He simply nodded, as if confirming something he had long suspected. The ancient Jedi texts mention similar techniques, he said calmly, though never pursued to this degree. He explained that the living Force can influence cellular processes, healing trances, and life extension being just the beginning. What Plagueis had done, he said, was the same principle, twisted to an unnatural extreme. When we asked his opinion on Plagueis' claim to create life through the Force, his tone grew cautious. Possible, perhaps, but at a terrible cost. The Force always seeks balance. To create life artificially would demand a counterbalanced death or suffering elsewhere in the cosmic equation. From Sinub, we went to Jocasta Nunot in her role as chief librarian, but privately, in her study. She was skeptical at first, but as we laid out the timeline, Plagueis' activities, and how they matched major galactic events, her demeanor shifted. "I've served the archives for decades," she said softly, "and I've noticed anomalies, historical records that subtly change between viewings, files that vanish quietly, no security logs, no evidence, just gone." From a hidden drawer, she produced a small journal, filled with her handwritten notes. "I've tracked these changes, patterns. They cluster around the same events and dates you've identified. Someone, it seemed, had been tampering with Jedi records, possibly for years. maybe even decades. If that was true, it meant the Order's understanding of recent history had been deliberately altered. Our third consultation took us far from Coruscant, the distant world of Kawa. There we met Jedi Master Thorm, who operated largely beyond the Council's watchful eye. He had long maintained contacts within the underworld. Spies, informants, syndicates, the criminal networks have been manipulated. For decades, Thorm confirmed after seeing our evidence. Black Sun, the Hutts, the Pikes, all of them. You look closely, and you'll see strange leadership changes, strategic shifts, always in sync with key Republic developments. He handed us a data file. Assassinations, accidents, leaders removed. Every time, the end result benefits Sith-style destabilization of the Republic. What chilled us most was what he said next. But after Damosk's death, the pattern didn't stop. It continued, perfectly, which means control passed smoothly to someone who understood the plan completely. But our final and most profound revelation came from Dagobah. On Jorik's suggestion, we traveled there, seeking the planet's raw connection to the living force. No cities, no technology, just the ancient swamp and the silence. There, in the stillness, we performed a rare Jedi ritual, communal meditation. We opened ourselves fully to the Force's guidance. The vision defied description. We saw ripples, concentric waves of energy radiating out from a central point in time. Plagueis, his manipulation of midichlorians had left scars in the Force, echoes that still resonated, and from those echoes something else had grown, a shadow, not a single being, not a location, but a presence woven through the fabric of the galaxy, not merely in the Republic, but of it. The Force didn't show us names or faces. It showed us a structure, influence, patterns, webs of control. When we awoke from the trance, hours had passed. The dark side has been ascendant far longer than any of us realized. Jorik said, his voice hushed as the swamp mist curled around us. Plagueis and his apprentice, whoever they are, have crafted a grand deception. The Jedi had been reactive, putting out fires while the rot spread underneath. We compared all the pieces: Zazas, Sojourn, Kuat, Dagobah. Together, they formed a picture too coherent to ignore. Plagueis had gained unprecedented control over life and death, but he had also implemented a multi-generational plan, using his power not for his own survival alone, but to reshape the Republic itself. And someone, his apprentice, was still carrying that plan forward. We have to take this to the full Council, Jorik said urgently as we boarded our ship. I know the evidence is circumstantial, but the pattern is clear. If a Sith Lord really is embedded within the Republic leadership, every moment we delay makes things worse. I agreed, but I warned caution. The Council had dismissed such warnings before. We would need to present only facts, verifiable, undeniable facts, unvoid speculation. No matter how compelling. As our ship climbed through Dagobah's dense atmosphere, the weight of our responsibility pressed down hard. We had started this journey seeking lost knowledge. Now we were carrying something far more dangerous, something that could determine the fate of the galaxy. Our return to Coruscant came at a pivotal moment. The full Jedi Council had been summoned to address the worsening Outer Rim crisis. General Grievous was striking harder than ever. Count Dooku continued his political subterfuge. Jorik used his connections with Master Windu to secure us a brief audience wedged between war briefings and strategic consultations. Some council members attended remotely via hologram. The war left little time for anything else. The chamber felt smaller than I remembered, as we stood in the center surrounded by the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. Master Yoda's gaze fixed on us, steady and penetrating, as if he sensed the weight of what we were about to reveal. "Masters," Jorik began, "we come before you with evidence that may alter everything we understand about the Sith and the war we now face." We presented everything, no embellishment, just facts. Plagueis research, his financial and political moves, the experiments, the timeline, the connection to the Clone Wars, the pattern, and we watched as a growing unease spread across the chamber. Some masters like Kyodamandi reacted with skepticism. Others, like Yoda and Windu, listened in grave silence. "Difficult to accept, these conclusions are," Yoda said at last, "but imply they do. That blind we have been to Sith manipulation for generations." "With respect, Master Yoda," I replied, "the evidence suggests that blindness was engineered. Plagueis used the banking clan as cover to manipulate galactic events without revealing his true identity." Master Windu leaned forward. "The evidence for Darth Plagueis is compelling, but the identity of his apprentice, and the idea that he still operates within the Republic, that remains speculation." We had debated this moment. Jorik took the risk. His tone was calm, measured. "Plagueis' death lines up precisely with Palpatine's rise to power, from financial influence to direct control through the Chancellorship, a perfect evolution of Sith strategy." A heavy silence followed. Some council members looked shaken. Others were visibly disturbed. "Chancellor Palpatine has been granted broad emergency powers," Jorik continued. "Each crisis expands his control in the exact pattern laid out in Plagueis records." Windu's expression hardened. "You're suggesting," he said slowly, "that Chancellor Palpatine may be the Sith apprentice we've been searching for." "We present only the evidence," I replied evenly. "The pattern continues from Plagueis to now, and it all converges on the office of the Chancellor. Whether Palpatine is complicit, manipulated, or the apprentice himself," Jorik added, "we can't say for certain, not yet. But we all knew what our findings implied, and so did the Council." The debate that followed was intense, but ultimately inconclusive. The Council remained divided. Some members saw our evidence as compelling, while others dismissed it as circumstantial. The political implications of investigating the Supreme Chancellor during wartime created practical obstacles that couldn't simply be ignored. "Proceed with caution. We must," Yoda said in his measured tone, "meditate on this information." "I will. Speak to young Skywalker, I shall, who, close to the Chancellor, has become." As the meeting adjourned, I felt that we had at least planted seeds of awareness. Whether those seeds would bloom in time to stop the culmination of the Sith Grand Plan, that remained uncertain. We left the Jedi Temple in silence, the weight of both partial success and partial failure pressing down on us. As we walked through the great marble corridors, Jorik suddenly stopped in his tracks, his face pale with a realization, the whisper lost in time. He said softly, echoing a phrase from my earlier vision on Bizis, "It has grown into a storm across eternity." "What do you mean?" I asked, though a cold chill had already taken root in my chest. "Plagueis experiments," Jorik said, his voice low and tense. "His attempt to create life directly through the Force, the vergences he claimed to have initiated. What if he succeeded?" The implication hit me like a THUNDERCLAP.A being, conceived through midichlorian manipulation. one who would be exceptionally powerful in the Force. The chosen one of Jedi prophecy, Jorik whispered. The one who would bring balance to the Force. For generations, we had believed that the prophecy foretold the destruction of the Sith. But what if we'd misunderstood it entirely? What if the balance it referenced wasn't what the Jedi had assumed? Anakin Skywalker, I said the name, slipping out before I even realized it. A child found on Tatooine, with the highest midichlorian count ever recorded. And no father conceived of the Force itself, according to his mother, added, eyes narrowing. But what if that conception wasn't natural? What if it was the result of Plagueis manipulation from afar? The true scale of the Sith plan began to come into focus. It wasn't just political infiltration or financial corruption. It was the creation of a weaponer being born of the Force, raised by the Jedi, and destined to destroy them. If Skywalker really is the product of Sith manipulation, I said quietly, and if Palpatine is Plagueis' apprentice, then his interest in Anakin takes on a whole new meaning. Every puzzle piece clicked into place with horrifying precision. Palpatine had always taken a special interest in Skywalker, always cultivated their relationship, always positioned himself as a mentor outside Jedi oversight. If he was a Sith Lord, then this connection to Anakin wasn't a coincidence. It was the final stage in a plan that began with Plagueis and was now being executed by his apprentice. We have to warn the Council now, Jorik said urgently, already turning back toward the chamber we had just left. But before we could move, alarms began to sound throughout the temple. Security alerts flashed red across the communication panels. Jedi rushed past us toward the main concourse. We intercepted Master Windu, striding with purpose, toward the temple hangar. Happened? Jorik called out. Mace Windu paused only briefly. General Grievous has been located on Utapau. Master Kenobi is being dispatched to deal with him. The Chancellor has requested that Skywalker be appointed as his personal representative on the Jedi Council. Master Windu guarding our earlier discussion about the Chancellor. I said quickly, I believe the situation may be more immediate than we realized. Windu's expression darkened. I've had similar concerns. He admitted, rest assured, we will deal with this matter definitively once Grievous has been eliminated. As he continued down the corridor, Jorik and I exchanged troubled glances. Events were moving too fast now. Something was building, some climactic confrontation that none of us could stop. The momentum was too great. The dark side clouds everything. Jorik quoted softly, the future is in constant motion around us. The Jedi Temple moved into high gear following Kenobi's departure for Utapau. Reports of success came in from all sides, suggesting that the Clone Wars might finally be turning in the Republic's favor. And yet, beneath the victories, we could sense it, a tremor in the Force, as if the very galaxy was holding its breath before a plunge into something irreversible. We retreated to the Jedi archives and spent the next few hours compiling our research into a comprehensive report, something that could survive us. If our worst fears came to pass, someone would need to understand the full scope of Plagueis' work and how it all led to this moment. The third open loop remains, Jorik observed as we worked. He was right. We had uncovered experiments. We had connected his political manipulations to the current war. But one final mystery still haunted us, the full truth of his death, and the complete identity of his apprentice. The answer, when it came, arrived with devastating swiftness, as the sun set over Coruscant, casting long shadows through the windows of the Jedi Temple. A massive disturbance rippled through the Force, so powerful that every Jedi must have felt it. Pain, betrayal, death, all emanating from the Senate District. We rushed to the temple's communications center and found it already packed with concerned Jedi. The reports were brief and terrifying. Master Windu and several council members had gone to confront Chancellor Palpatine, who had now been identified as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. Something had gone wrong, horribly wrong. Within the hour, the horror became undeniable. Columns of clone troopers marched on the Jedi Temple. At their head, a lone figure in dark robes, wielding a blue lightsaber with brutal precision. Security holocoms caught fragments of the assault before going offline. It was Anakin Skywalker. His eyes burned with yellow hatred. He cut down Jedi without hesitation, without mercy. Plagueis creation, Jorik whispered, barely audible as we watched the footage, turned against the very order that raised him. The temple's defenses activated, but confusion reigned. The clones, our trusted soldiers, executed Jedi with mechanical precision. Some spoke of inhibitor chips, of hidden contingency orders, but there was no time to understand it. We were fighting for our lives. The younglings, I said suddenly. We have to get them out. They were the most vulnerable members of our Orderand now, the most endangered. We fought our way to the initiate quarters, gathering as many children as we could. The sounds of battle echoed through the temple, lightsabers igniting, blaster fire cutting through the stillness. The sanctuary of 1,000 generations had become a war zone. We led our group of terrified younglings toward a maintenance tunnel that connected the temple to the lower levels of Coruscant. Twice we had to engage clone troopers, familiar faces now twisted into weapons of slaughter. Jorik took a blaster shot to the shoulder, but pushed forward, refusing to stop as we neared the exit. We halted, sensing a presence ahead, Anakin fully consumed by the dark side, standing in the tunnel junction, his blue blade casting an unnatural glow across his face. "Take the children," Jorik said quietly. "Go, I'll hold him off." There was no time to argue, no time for goodbyes. I turned and led the children down an alternate path. Behind us, the sounds of a lightsaber duel echoed through the stone. Jorik the scholar, the gentle researcher, now the last wall between innocence and annihilation. Moments later, I felt it through the Force. His passing, a flash of pain, then peace. He had become one with the energy he had studied all his life. His sacrifice bought us the time we needed. We reached the tunnel and descended into the shadowy underworld of Coruscant, where clone patrols would struggle to follow. The next few hours passed in a blur, constant movement, constant vigilance. I led the younglings through dark corridors and deserted industrial zones, calling in favors from old contacts and informants. One by one, I secured safe places for the children, hiding them, suppressing their Force presence from the eyes of the new regime. By dawn, I stood alone on a weather-worn landing platform in the industrial sector. The Imperial Declaration had been playing on repeat all night, Palpatine's twisted visage proclaiming a new order, rising from the Jedi Rebellion, and now the puzzle was complete. Palpatine was Darth Sidious' apprentice to Plagueis. He had continued his master's grand design with ruthless efficiency. The war, the emergency powers, the clone army, the grooming of Anakin Skywalker into a weapon of darkness, all of it, a plan decades in the making. And the final irony, the bitterest of all, was this: Plagueis, who had sought immortality through mastery of midichlorians, had been murdered by the very apprentice he trained. Just as Sith tradition demanded, and yet his legacy lived on. Sidious now ruled the galaxy. Both had dreamed of Plagueis, hadn't conquered death through his experiments, but he had ensured the Sith would conquer the galaxy. His immortality wasn't in flesh, but in consequence. As I prepared to leave Coruscant with what remained of our research, I looked one last time at the Jedi Temple in the distance, now crowned with imperial banners. Smoke still rose from the ancient towers. The Jedi Sanctuary was no more. The story of Darth Plagueis had reached its end, but not the one he'd imagined. His pursuit of life, creation, and death defiance had changed the galaxy, just not in the way anyone expected. The knowledge we gathered had come too late to stop catastrophe, but perhaps, one day, it could help light a path out of the darkness. The Force, ever seeking balance, would not let the Sith's triumph endure forever. And with that hope, dim though it was, I turned away from the temple and stepped into exile. The stars glowed silently above me as my vessel slipped through hyperspace. Behind me lay Coruscant, no longer the capital of the Republic, but the heart of a brutal new empire. Ahead, only uncertainty and exile, but also the ember of hope. I had sent encrypted copies of our research to trusted allies throughout the galaxy, hidden inside innocent-looking cultural artifacts. The story of Plagueis and Sidious had to survive, even if I did not. If future generations were to stop the Sith from rising again, they would need to know. As the hum of the hyperdrive settled into a rhythmic lull, I found my thoughts drifting not to fear, but to reflection. The tale of Darth Plagueis was never just about a Sith Lord. It was about knowledge, ambition, and the eternal cycle of the Force. Plagueis tried to transcend nature, tried to manipulate life itself. He wanted godlike control over the very fabric of existence, but he missed the most important truth of all. His apprentice would betray him, as all Sith apprentices eventually do. The stars beyond my viewport stretched into bright blue lines. Plagueis had distorted life, distorted the Force, but he was never its master. Even the most powerful beings are still part of something greater. The Jedi had always taught that death wasn't the end. It was a transformation, a return to the Force. Plagueis saw death as an enemy to conquer. Now, as the last flickers of the Republic fade, I take comfort in the one truth the Sith could never destroy. This too shall pass. Empires rise, empires fall. Darkness gives way to light, which fades again into shadow. The cycle is eternal. Plagueis laboratories are gone. Now his estate sealed, his files scattered, but his legacy lingers. His ripples in the Force will take generations to calm. And I think of the children, the younglings we saved, scattered across the stars, hidden, growing. Their future will be hard, but the Force will guide them. The ancient texts speak of balance not as a static state, but as motion, as a dance. Perhaps the rise of the Sith and the fall of the Jedi is only one verse in that song, and the darkness rising now is not the end, only a passage. And so, as sleep begins to take me, I surrender to the rhythm of the ship, the stars, and the Force itself. The immortality Plagueis sought was never found in endless breath, but perhaps, just perhaps, in becoming one with the Force, he did find redemption.